So can I just revisit two subject matters with one example? Mr. Folds, sorry, I can't read from here. Spence, and perhaps Dr. Kennedy. You'd be familiar with acoustic vehicle alerting systems?
Yes, Senator, we've spoken about that.
So you're familiar with them. Now, we've talked about ADRs being 2 and 5 years. So are you familiar with Tesla Motors?
Yes, Senator.
Volkswagen?
Yes, Senator.
And are you familiar with their publicly stated position that they will not include warning sounds in their electric drive vehicles, as both have decided to add artificial sounds only when required by regulation?
Senator, no, I wasn't aware of the last statement.
Okay. So you are aware of the Monash study into visually impaired people and the increase in accidents, if you like, or injuries from electric vehicles because they're quiet?
Yes, Senator.
So tying these things together, are we going to have to wait 2 to 5 years before the bloody obvious, to not pardon the pun, silent vehicles interact with visually impaired people, 50% higher risk of injury or worse? Are we going to have to wait 2 to 5 years for someone in your 59 people to do an ADR to tell us that?
Excuse me, Senator, I might ask Ms Nyakangama to provide an update.
Sorry, you're the DepSec. Can you answer it?
No, Senator, that's why I'm asking my colleague.
You can't answer whether it's 2 to 5 years.
Well, Senator, as we've said, that is the normal time frame for making ADRs.
There is nothing normal about 2 to 5 years to put in place common sense.
Yes, Senator, that is the time frame that it takes, but I'm asking my colleague if she can give us an update on where we're up to about the specific issue you're asking about.
Well, an update? I just want...
Well, let's hear this.
Okay. Update me.
We're not currently doing any specific work on a noise standard for electric vehicles in the Vehicle Safety Standards ADR work program.
So what I read from that is, when it gets on the agenda of the department, it will take 2 to 5 years, but it is not currently on the agenda.
Not in the development of new ADRs. Senator, can I take on notice? I think it may be on our harmonisation and maintenance program, where we update to incorporate the latest versions of standards that we already have in place. But I'm not sure exactly where that's at. I'll take that on notice as to the work that's underway. I don't have any information with me at the moment about it.
Can I just ask Mr. Folds, you're supposedly the expert in this space, or at least you've been there for a fair while at estimates, so maybe you're not an expert, you're just a regular attender. Were you aware that Japan issued guidelines in January 2010 on acoustic vehicle alerting systems?
No.
Were you aware that the US approved legislation in December 2010?
No.
Well, when do we become aware of these things? And do we just wait till enough blind people have been run over? I mean, Monash have done the study. The visually impaired people have made a presentation to myself and Senator Sterle and anybody else that will listen to them.
Senator, as we said, we'll take on notice and provide you with an update in terms of any work we're doing on harmonisation around existing standards.
Well, I'd just like to leave you with this. There is a pressing issue identified by Monash and paid for by the Blind Visually Impaired Vision Australia, and it has come back with a significant, in their view, elevated risk. It is not only simply electric vehicles, it's hybrid vehicles, of which there are many. Elderly pedestrians, visually impaired people, people who are hard of hearing are at risk. There are international standards out there adopted by other jurisdictions, but I want to be very clear on this, Dr. Kennedy, it is not on your horizon as yet.
It's not on our horizon as an ADR. We're confirming for you about the harmonisation matter.
Who makes the decisions about when it becomes an ADR?
Usually, Senator, it's part of the action plan that's agreed by the Transport and Infrastructure Council, so they identify the priority areas
And how frequently do they meet?
The action plan's identified updated every 3 years, and that sort of sets out a forward agenda. Obviously, if a new issue comes up, that doesn't preclude us from progressing other items.
So do they meet more frequently than 3 years apart?
They
They
meet
meet
about
twice.
every 6 months.
Yeah, twice
When are
a
they
year.
next due to meet?
They meet in June when we're going to take the other road safety matters that we were discussing before.
Okay, so it's possible, Mr Kennedy, for this to get onto the June agenda as a. Could we urge it? I mean, I think it's eminent, and I suspect you do too. I think it's eminently sensible to look at this with the advent of electric vehicles. I know my own car goes quiet at the pedestrian crossings, particularly where, you know, impaired people could be forgiven for thinking that there's no vehicles there. Our vehicle sits there silently. I know one of my secretaries, her vehicle it shuts off. It's most disconcerting when it first happens. You want to get out and lift the bonnet. But could we just know that you're going to really lift this through the stakes as best you can to convince them to get it onto the agenda to get this progress started?
It's entirely consistent with the recommendation 7 of the strategy that the senators have been talking about around implement rapid deployment and accelerated update of proven vehicle safety technologies and innovation. So
Right.
it's right in the middle of it, Senator.
And while we're on the subject of killing pedestrians, whether they're blind or not, the evidence from the coronial hearing about sound warnings from particular prime movers and trucks that can't see pedestrians who might be weaving through the traffic, to have a sensor alert that if there's any, we got them for kangaroos,
Yep.
that if there's any movement within a range of their blind range,
Yes.
there should be no reason why that can't be coupled up with this. And for that matter, any other issue about where sound warnings, whether it's blind people running through the traffic in Melbourne, or I don't know of any others, but it might be well worth your department workshopping this, finding out what it is and packaging it all up.
We will package up the new technology opportunities. That issue was discussed at the Darwin, at the TIC that was held in Darwin in the middle of last year. New South Wales Minister brought the issue, and with some demonstrations of those blind spots you're speaking.
And I was interested in Mr Foles' answer, and it was a good, honest and prompt answer. Thank you, Mr Foles. It makes these proceedings go quicker. But do you not have anyone who, I don't know, we political parties hire these young ones who sit there with their feet on the desk with no shoes on, watching every single movement that's happening in the world? Have you not got that around matters of road safety and these sorts of things? I mean, that...
We do have staff looking at all those issues, Senator, but when we answer these questions, we have to answer them in
your own context about what's in your scope of knowledge. Pity one of your colleagues didn't do a bit more of that tonight. But so this could be well within your system somewhere, that these countries done these things. It just hasn't made its way.
Well,
That's absolutely correct. I have seen reports about what's happening in other countries. It isn't on our work program at the moment, but I've undertaken to come back and say how we will get it in the opportunities to include that on the work program.
But Chair, with respect, we're talking about work that was done in Japan and the United States 9 years ago.
Yeah. They're acknowledging it.
UN number.
Hasn't filtered through. But anyway, Dr. Kennedy, you mentioned the report, so I'd like to very quickly go through that.
Yes.
The release of the report, 12 September 2018. The department has the department been working on all 12 of the recommendations?
yes, I think one of my colleagues gave us some evidence earlier that apart from the governance review, that task force is to take all the recommendations to the next Transport Infrastructure Council meeting in June of this year, with a plan.
Have you identified actions for the Commonwealth to take?
Well, sorry.
Senator, that's what we're working on at the moment. The point that you've just made is around the audible warnings is something that would obviously fit very neatly in with recommendation 7. We're currently in the process of being as ambitious as we possibly can to get a meaningful decision out of the Transport and Infrastructure Council meeting later this year.
We're all pretty good on our feet, but have you actually identified actions as we speak and prepared to take them to the government?
We're in the process of doing that, Senator. I'm not trying to be cute on that, but we're
So
we're
you're not at
actively
the
working
stage
on
of
it.
actual advice on individual recommendations as yet. Is that correct?
Around issues such as the nature of investment in infrastructure and how it supports road safety and those sorts of issues which are in our remit, we are providing advice to the Deputy Prime Minister on those issues, but a number of issues such as accelerate the adoption of speed management initiatives, recommendation aid and others, we have to do with the states. So in some cases where we can move, we're providing advice to our own government. In other cases, we're working with the states and territories
Have there been any resource increases in the Department for Road Safety in the research and policy area since the report was released?
Senator, we did go through these a little bit earlier on, and as I indicated then, we have actually increased, established a task force within the Surface Transport Policy Division,
Okay.
which has got
That was the additional...
it's got four additional resources.
All right, thank you. So, initially the Deputy Prime Minister announced a response to only one recommendation, the Governance Review, and released terms of reference for that review on the 23rd of January 2019. Whose decision was it for the Department to conduct that review, essentially reviewing its own processes and performance?
Senator, the decision to establish a task force was taken to make sure that we...
Whose decision was it?
It's the government's decision.
Government's
Senator.
decision,
So
Senator.
did you get advice from yourselves?
We've actually we're establishing an independent peer review to make sure that it's not the bureaucrats reviewing the bureaucrats, and we're also, as Ms Tucker mentioned earlier, we've got secondees from the states and territories as well. So we are introducing measures to make sure that there is external scrutiny over what we're doing. We're also working very closely with the stakeholders, as we mentioned before. We're engaging with Dr Crozier and Mr Woolley, who we have a great deal of respect in, making sure the direction that we're going in accords with their views expressed in the inquiry report.
So just go to the issue of bureaucrats reviewing. So how have you ensured that this is best practice, and how have you ensured that there's some independent authority in it?
Senator Gallagher, as I mentioned, we are getting an independent peer review to...
By who?
We haven't identified them, but yet the actual individuals, but people who've got a background in road safety, both at a domestic and international level, and also someone with a governance background as well.
So is that another layer of... Okay, so you've got a review which is going to be independently reviewed.
We'll have independent peer review of the governance review.
What does the government's red tape committee think about your exercise of
Part of the
your
issue we
responsibilities
decided to do this ourselves, Senator, or the government did, is if it was to go and be done by another review, then we would respond to that review. And one of the things that we really wanted to get on with in the National Road Safety Strategy in response to the inquiry was get the people who will be working on these issues on the job and working on how this could work more efficiently in the future, I beg your pardon. And it's why we got the states directly involved in the task force. We really want, this time, everybody in the tent working together on this issue rather than somebody giving us another review from upon high and then us forming another response. We're looking to get a more active response to the 12 recommendations that were given to us by John and Jeremy.
So the working group, has that been publicly announced? Membership thereof?
The task force has been publicly announced. The working group is just the representatives from the Commonwealth, states and territories, but the existence of it has been publicly announced. We haven't announced who the peer reviewers will be. They haven't been selected yet.
Okay. Who ultimately is responsible for the outputs of the working group?
The
outputs of the working group will go to TIC. So the outputs of the working group will go to the Transport Infrastructure Council meeting. So fundamentally, the ministers will be responsible for what gets released and decided. If they're happy with it, we go ahead. If they're not, we'll go back and do it again.
How does the department propose to ensure that all stakeholders have visibility to the review and an appropriate level of input?
Senator, we've already reached out to everyone who made a recommendation to the inquiry report indicating that the task force has been set up, and making sure they're aware of it. We've said we'd be happy to take any information from them. We're reviewing all the submissions that were received, and we will continue to engage with those stakeholders. And if there are other people who you feel that we should be engaging with, then we'd be very happy to take any suggestions from you as well.
So will you appoint a stakeholder reference group to provide input to the review and ensure full transparency?
Given the breadth of stakeholders that we're dealing with, the thought of limiting it down to what would be a manageable forum, we've identified, I think, up to about 300 potential stakeholders to work with. So as I said, we're reaching out to all of those, and we're testing very closely with people like Jeremy and John. Lachlan, we've engaged with Lachlan McIntosh just to make sure we are getting the most appropriate feedback that we can on the direction we're going in.
Okay, so the inquiry report was to be provided by the government in September. Well, the inquiry report you got in September 18
yes.
recommended that the governance review be completed by March 2019. Has there been a significant delay with the timing of that review starting?
Senator, the terms of reference were released last month, and we're still working towards the March time frame.
To go to the June tick.
Okay, so a draft report is still scheduled to be released in March?
To go to the peer review in March.
And we're looking for a Transport Industry Infrastructure Council meeting during the first half of the year? Or?
In June.
In June.
It's scheduled for June.
So are you on track to meet those commitments?
Yes, we're on track for those commitments.
And you're satisfied that those timelines are realistic and appropriate?
They are tight, Senator,
Yeah.
but we see this as a great opportunity to move the issue forward.
Do you expect there will be a Transport Infrastructure Council meeting during the first half or even in June of 2019, given the fact that there's a federal election in May?
Well, the ministers at the last COAG meeting in November agreed to hold a meeting in June, which would be what's a matter for government around the election, but which seemed to be anyway an appropriate time to hold the meeting.
Well, I can understand it being programmed, but it's not likely to happen, is it?
In June?
Well, you've got to have an election in May, then you've got to have, declaration of polls, then you've got to have swearing in or whatever of new ministers. It's very unlikely to be a federal minister available in June, isn't it?
Look, Senator, I can't comment on the precise election timing. If the meeting needs to move back in June, then of course the minister would take that decision. There was the Victorian state election, New South Wales election as well, so June seemed to be the best time, or the earliest we could get ticked back together.
Fatality data is usually made available by the department on around the 14th day of each month. However, December 18 was not released until 18 January 2019. Any reason for that? Aberration?
I have to take that on notice, Senator.
Well, you on leave, Mr. Foltz?
On the 18th of December,
Well,
14th of December, no.
I mean, it's not happened before. The data comes out.
I don't know.
That's actually BITRA that releases that. I'm very sorry, Senator. He's just not. Gary's not. The head of BITRA is not here, so we just.
But I'll see if I can find out.
Okay.
Well, I would like you to take on. I mean, we're not aware of it happening before. It comes out regular as clockwork, and it was delayed from December to January.
Okay. We'll find out this.
Yeah.
So let's just have another little stab in the dark. So vehicle emissions. So we know vehicle emissions, and the government's announced the formation of the Ministerial Forum on vehicle emissions in October 2015. Forum was charged with formulating policy on fuel quality standards, NOx emissions, CO2 standards for passenger vehicles. Does that ministerial forum on vehicle emissions still exist?
Yes, Senator.
Who's the chair, or which minister?
The Deputy Prime Minister is the chair, and the other members are Minister Price and Minister Taylor.
Okay, how many times has it met?
It's met on 13 occasions since it was first established.
With how many different ministers? I'll have to take that on notice.
Sorry, what was the question, Senator?
With how many different ministers?
I'd have to take that on notice, Senator.
If we go back to the ADR and the... Mr Fole, would you be familiar with the Euro 6 diesel engine?
Yes. Light or heavy?
Heavy.
I'm aware of it, yes.
Yeah. So you're aware of the fuel savings and the emission savings?
Yes.
Yeah. You're aware of the weight issue with the front axle weights in Australia and the ADRs? How long will it take you to get the ADRs in shape so that we can enjoy Euro 6 engines and heavy vehicles? Is that a 2 to 5 year after it gets on the agenda?
Senator, I don't know the answer to that as a technical expert, but Ms Nikengama might know that detail.
One of the priority actions in the current action plan, the 2018-2020 action plan, is to look at removing barriers to the introduction of cleaner and safer heavy vehicles. So one of the things that we're looking at is potential trade-offs for dimension and mass limits for safer and cleaner additions to the vehicles.
So
that's
it's
we're
made
looking
a priority list.
It's on the current action plan.
And what's the...
And so we hope to have explored that and have something, some recommendations or changes in place by the end of the current action plan, which is 2020.
What will happen in 2020?
So we will have completed the research and have some recommendations, and hopefully, we'll be able to recommend some revisions to current ADRs that would allow some relaxations to mass and dimension limits in the current ADRs, provided that there are sort of beneficial emissions or safety outcomes because of those relaxations.
Are you aware of the issue about the front axle weight?
I don't understand it technically, but I am aware that there is an issue.
So we got 6.5 tonne and these are heavier. So every bridge, every road, every place in the country is going to have a view on this. But you're telling us by 2020 you'll have it fixed?
No, I'm saying we will have explored options to address some of
it. Chair, my shadow has instructed me to cede the rest of the time to another.